My father pointed at me across the dinner table and screamed, "Get out!" My mother said nothing. My sister smirked. The relatives nodded like it was justice. I grabbed my old suitcase, leaving the house I'd spent 10 years quietly fixing. They thought they'd finally toss the useless one in work boots. They didn't know that phrase triggered a secret will. 24 hours later, I held the keys to a $20 million coastal mansion, and this time, I was the one pointing at the gate. "Dad, get out of my house. My name is Morgan Clark. I am 32 years old, a certified master electrician with Northbridge Electric. My days are spent in the clean, skeleton frameworks of multi-million-dollar homes in Westport Cove, pulling high-gauge copper for integrated smart systems and climate controls that cost more than my car. I'm the one they call when the architects design something impossible and the engineers shrug. I make things work. Then, I drive home. Or rather, to the house I grew up in. The evening gathering was supposed to be a family crisis meeting, which, in the Clark household, meant a mandatory performance. My parents' house sits in an older neighborhood, sagging under the weight of deferred maintenance. The vinyl siding is warped, the porch steps groan, and a thicket of coaxial cables and unauthorized extension cords staple the exterior walls like disorganized ivy. It's a fire trap, I should know. I've been trying to fix it in secret for a decade. Inside, however, was Diane Clark's masterpiece of illusion. My mother is a woman obsessed with the appearance of family, a curator of a museum that only exists on Facebook. The lighting was dim and warm, hiding the water stains on the ceiling. The table was set with the good china, the one she bought with a bonus check I'd given her 2 Christmases ago. The smell of a roasting chicken barely masked the damp rot from the leaking shower stall directly above the dining room. My sister, Lena, was already recording, just capturing the vibe. Everyone she chirped, panning her phone across the table. Lena is an interior stylist and a minor local influencer. A queen of image, her entire life is content, and every family meal is a potential post. Sunday dinner with the fam, so blessed to have this support system. I watched the tiny red light on her phone and felt the familiar tightness in my chest. I slid into my usual chair, the one with the wobbly leg I hadn't gotten around to bracing. My father, Greg Clark, stamped in from the garage. He runs a small-time contracting business, Clark Son Construction. Though he has no son, he has me, which was apparently worse. He's a man who loves the idea of building but cuts corners on the execution. He lives on bravado, shoddy workmanship, and a mounting pile of debt. "Turn that thing off, Lena," he grumbled. Not because he minded the camera, but because his performance wasn't ready. "Dad, it's just for the aesthetic." She sighed, but she lowered the phone, though I knew it was still recording audio from her lap. "We're here," my mother announced, placing the chicken on the table. She speaks in press releases. "We are here tonight as a family, and families support one another. We find solutions. We present a unified front." I looked at the walls around me. The unified front was displayed in dozens of mismatched frames. Here was Lena graduating high school, Lena winning a regional dance trophy, Lena's first featured living room in a local throwaway magazine. There was not one single photograph of me, not one, not my high school graduation, not my trade school certification, not the award I won from the state electrical board. I was the ghost in the machine, the unseen labor. I fixed the rattling furnace in winter. I rewired the faulty breaker that kept tripping. I paid the overdue utility bills quietly online so the lights would stay on for their perfect Facebook photos. The tension at the table was thick enough to cut. The chicken sat untouched. Greg cleared his throat, pushing his peas around his plate. The bank called again. My mother stiffened. "Greg, we agreed to discuss this constructively. There's nothing constructive about it." "Diane," he snapped. "They're calling the loan. The whole note. This was it. The real crisis." Greg's company had been sued. He'd built a small duplex development, and the roof on one unit had collapsed during the first heavy rain. It was pure negligence. He'd used substandard shingles and spaced the trusses too far apart to save a few $1,000s. I knew this because I'd seen the blueprints he'd stolen the design from. And then I'd seen his altered, cheaper version. Miraculously, no one was hurt. No children were playing underneath. No families were home. It was just property damage, insurance claims, and the exposed truth of his shoddy work. "It's a shakedown," Greg muttered, tearing a roll in half. That inspector always had it in for me. Now, because of one bad storm, they want to ruin me. It's not just the lawsuit. "Dad," I said quietly. The table went silent. I rarely spoke up during these meetings. "You've been floating dead on that line of credit for 3 years. The roof collapse just gave them a reason to finally look at the books." His eyes narrowed. "And what would you know about books?" "Morgan, you just pull wires. I know that you can't keep borrowing against hypothetical future jobs you haven't even bid on," I said, keeping my voice level. "This is exactly the kind of negativity that tears a family apart." Diane inserted, her voice tight with disapproval. Greg waved his hand, dismissing me. He looked around the table, putting on his patriarch mask. "The point is, the bank is spooked. If we don't show them fresh capital, they're seizing the company assets, and that includes this house." Lena finally looked up from her phone, her eyes wide with actual fear. "The house. They can't take the house. My stuff is here. This is where we all have to pull together," Greg said, and his gaze landed squarely on me. It was the look he always gave me before he asked for money, the look that said, "You are the emergency fund. This is a time for sacrifice." Lena, sensing the attention was shifting away from her, quickly jumped in. "I'm sacrificing. I am so stressed. You guys, this model home deadline for the new Westport Cove Estates is killing me. The textiles are all back-ordered, and the client is just toxic." She let out a dramatic sigh. "And I still owe you for that last loan." "Morgan, I know. Things are just so tight." She didn't sound apologetic. She said it like it was my utility bill, an expected cost of her existence. Greg saw his opening. He leaned forward, lacing his thick fingers together on the table. "That's not the loan we're worried about. Lena," he turned back to me. "Morgan, you have that apartment, the one you bought." I froze. "What about it? It's got equity. You've been paying on it for, 6, 7 years? You've got good credit? Solid? Not like mine. After this lawsuit." He pushed a folder across the table. It slid over the placemat and stopped right in front of my plate. I had the bank draw up the papers. "You co-sign on a new business loan. We use your apartment as collateral. Just to show good faith. It's a formality. It saves the company. It saves this house." He smiled. A big, broad, salesman smile. "We all win. The family pulls through." I looked at the folder. I didn't open it. I knew exactly what it was. It wasn't a co-signature. It was a sacrifice. He was asking me to put the one thing I had built for myself, my tiny, safe, 80% mortgaged apartment, on the altar of his incompetence. If he defaulted when he defaulted, the bank would take my home, not his. This was the first time he had asked for something I couldn't get back. "No," the word was quiet, but it landed in the center of the table like a grenade. Greg's smile vanished. "What did you say?" I said no. "Dad," I looked him right in the eyes. "I am not leveraging my apartment for you. I am not signing that paper." "Morgan," he said, his voice dangerously low, "you're not understanding what's at stake." "I understand perfectly," I said, and the years of silence were suddenly gone, replaced by a cold, clear exhaustion. "You're being sued because you cut corners. Again. You've been taking loans from me for 10 years to cover your mistakes. I've paid for the new water heater in this house. I paid your truck insurance for a full year. I paid the property taxes last spring. I will not lose my home because you are too proud to admit you failed. How dare you?" Diane's voice was sharp, rising in offense. "This family gave you everything we fed you. We put clothes on your back. We gave you a roof over your head, and I've been repairing that roof for free." I shot back, my voice finally rising. "I've been repairing the plumbing and the wiring and paying the bills you forget. When do the payments stop?" "Mom, at what point am I paid in full for the shoes I wore when I was 9? The room erupted, My aunt and uncle, who had been silent observers, now chimed in, "Morgan, he's your father. You shouldn't speak to your mother that way. This is what happens when kids think they're better than their family. You're selfish." I was pushed back in my chair. Figuratively and literally, I was cornered in the dining room. The performance shattered. The warm, curated lighting now just looked yellow and sick. Highlighting the spiderweb cracks in the ceiling plaster, Lena was watching me. Her face a mask of fascinated disgust. Greg's face was beet red. He had lost control. He stood up so fast his chair screeched and fell backward. He pointed a thick, sawdust-caked finger at my face. "This is the family," he bellowed, his voice echoing in the small, damp room. "You are either with us or you are against us. We are drowning, and you are holding on to your little lifeboat and watching us sink. I'm not the one who drilled holes in the boat. Dad." "That's it," he roared. "I've had enough of your disrespect. I've had enough of your smart mouth and your better-than-thou attitude. If you are not with this family, you are not part of this family." He took a step toward me, his shadow falling over the table. "Get out." A terrible, heavy silence pressed down. It was just 3 words, but they hung in the air, absolute. I looked at my mother. She stared intently at the congealing gravy. I looked at Lena. She was brushing a crumb off her sleeve, a tiny, satisfied smirk playing on her lips. I looked at my aunt and uncle. They nodded, slowly, in agreement with the sentence. They were looking at me as if I were a stranger, a traitor. Not one person spoke up. Not one person said, "Greg, don't be ridiculous." Not one person met my eyes with anything but judgment or indifference. The silence was their agreement. I swallowed. The lump in my throat tasted like rust and insulation. I looked around the room, at the flickering light I'd promised to fix, at the peeling wallpaper by the door. I had given my time, my money, and my skills to this house, to these people, hoping that one day they would finally see me. They saw me now, and they were casting me out. I stood up slowly, picking up my jacket from the back of the chair. "Okay," I said. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just turned my back on the untouched meal and the broken family and walked out the front door, closing it quietly behind me. I didn't drive to my apartment, not right away. I just drove. I ended up at the old pier in Maple Harbor, the next town over, the one where I actually grew up before my parents moved to the slightly more respectable neighborhood in Westport Cove. Maple Harbor is all salt wind, damp wood, and the smell of diesel from the fishing boats. It's a place of function, not aesthetics, which is probably why I've always preferred it. I parked the truck and cut the engine, listening to the metallic tink-tink-tink of the engine cooling in the night air. The house I just left, the one my father always bragged about, was his monument to himself. "I built this place with my own 2 hands," he'd boom at every barbecue, gesturing at the crooked porch. He had built it, technically. He was the contractor, but he'd also cut every corner imaginable, a habit he'd never break. My role in the family was cemented when I was 9 years old. I remember the sound, a sharp zzz pop from the kitchen, followed by the smell of ozone and melting plastic. The main outlet behind the refrigerator sparked, throwing a little shower of blue fire before the breaker tripped, plunging the house into silence. Greg, of course, blamed the original electrician, the hack job who installed it. He cursed for 10 minutes straight, but he didn't call anyone. He just grumbled, reset the breaker, and told us all not to use that plug, which, given it was for the refrigerator, was not a long-term solution. The refrigerator was plugged into a bright orange extension cord, snaked across the floor to the living room. It stayed that way for a week. I watched my mother trip over it, watched my father just step over it. I was curious. The power was off in that section of the house, so I went to the town library. I pulled out a book, one of those old 1970s home repair manuals with the faded color photos. I read about wiring, about gauges, about black and white and ground. That Saturday, while everyone was out, I turned off the main breaker at the panel. I pulled the scorched outlet from the wall. The insulation on the black wire had been nicked during installation and was making contact with the ground screw. It was a simple, stupid, dangerous mistake. I went to the hardware store with my allowance, bought a new, heavy-duty outlet for $2.40, and a small roll of electrical tape. I carefully, slowly, followed the diagram from the book. I put it all back together. I flipped the main breaker. I went to the kitchen and plugged the toaster into the new outlet. The toast popped up, hot and brown. When Greg came home, he found the refrigerator plugged back into the wall, humming away. He didn't ask how. He just looked at the outlet, then at me. He didn't say thank you. He grunted. Huh. A week later, the porch light flickered and died. He didn't grab the phone. He just pointed at me. That girl's handy. I heard him tell my mother when he thought I wasn't listening. Get her to look at it. It's cheaper than hiring someone. From that day on, I was the designated repairman, while Lena, my sister, was signed up for ballet, then painting, then public speaking classes for her confidence. My mother would say I was handed a rusty toolbox that had been my grandfather's. At least you're useful, Greg told me, and he meant it as a compliment. Lena was the investment in the family's image. I was the investment in the family's infrastructure. In high school, I was a solid B+, A- student. I was good at physics, good at math, but no one ever mentioned college for me. Not really. When I brought up SATs, Greg just waved his hand. That's a waste of money for someone like you, he said, not unkindly. You're a hands-on girl. Morgan, you're built for a trade. You'll make good money. The truth, which I didn't fully understand until later, was that all the money, all the planning, was for Lena's bright future. She was the one who was going to go to a 4-year university, join a sorority, and marry someone impressive. I was the one who was going to work. So I did. I went to the county trade school, got my certifications. I apprenticed, working freezing cold sites in January. My fingers so numb I could barely strip a wire. I was usually the only woman on the crew. I put up with the grime, the rain, the casual condescension, and a strange thing happened. I found I was respected there, not pampered, God no, but respected. When I pulled a clean run, when I diagnosed a complex fault, when I refused to sign off on a subpanel that wasn't to code. The foreman nodded. They started asking for me. I felt more at home in the skeleton of a half-built building, surrounded by cables and conduits, than I ever did in my own living room. My first real paycheck from Northbridge Electric. I felt a pride I'd never known. I opened a savings account. My second paycheck, I started a retirement fund. My third, I started saving for a down payment. The calls from home started soon after. It wasn't a big demand, not at first. It was Greg, sounding casual. Hey, Morgan, the car insurance lapsed. Can you cover the payment I'll pay you back on Friday? I paid it. Friday came and went, and it was never mentioned. Then it was Lena. Morgan, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. I forgot to pay my studio rent for my styling business. The landlord is being such a jerk. Could you just, so I don't get evicted, just for peace? I transferred the money. It became a habit. $100 here for a short-term loan. Greg never paid back. $50 there for Lena's business expenses. We're family, Greg would say with that big false laugh whenever I'd ask about it. Who's counting, right? They were counting on me. I used to think that my parents just didn't love me. But sitting there in my truck, listening to the tide pull at the shore, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. It was more complicated. They loved the useful version of me. They loved my function. They loved that I was a high-earning, low-maintenance cost asset. They loved that I could fix the toilet, pay the tax bill, and never ask for anything in return. But me, the actual person. The one who liked old science fiction novels and hated the smell of cilantro, they had no idea who she was. I'm not sure they ever cared to find out. I remembered one afternoon, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I'd come home from a brutal 16-hour emergency call at a commercial site. It was raining. That cold. Driving November rain. The gutter over the front door had come loose and was pouring water directly onto the porch step. I sighed, pulled my 20-foot ladder off the truck rack, and got to work, soaked and shivering. As I was clipping the gutter back in place, I looked through the living room window. My mother was on the sofa, and Lena was curled up with her head in my mother's lap, sobbing. I could hear her faintly through the glass. Her boyfriend of 3 weeks had broken up with her. My mother was stroking her hair, cooing. "It's okay, baby. He didn't deserve you. You're too bright, too special. It's his loss, my sweet, special girl." I was standing right there, 10 feet away, dripping wet, holding a ladder, physically preventing the house from flooding, and neither of them even glanced at the window. I was invisible. That was the real pain. It wasn't the big, dramatic betrayals. It was the slow, steady drip, drip, drip of 1,000 tiny ones. It was the accumulation of dismissals. Every time I fixed something, the reaction wasn't, "Thank you, Morgan, we appreciate you." It was, "See, that was easy," or, "If she can do it, anyone can. It's no big deal." They minimized my skill to justify their use of it. They had to believe it was easy for me. Otherwise, they'd have to admit they were exploiting me. So I learned to be quiet. I stopped talking about my job, my successes, my savings. I walled off my real life from my family life. I built a fortress of silence, because it was the only way to protect the one thing I was building for myself, my escape, my little apartment. And tonight, they had come for it. They had finally demanded the last thing I had, the very foundation of my separate life. And I, for the first time, had said no. That no had shattered the silence, and my father's response, "Get out," wasn't just an eviction notice. It was the sound of a dam breaking. It was the sound of all that accumulated, unspoken history finally, terribly, coming due. 3 months before I walked out of that house, my days were spent at Oceanfall. It wasn't just a house, it was a monument, perched on the cliffs of Westport Cove. Oceanfall House was a $20 million behemoth of glass, steel, and reclaimed Brazilian hardwood. It was the kind of place that magazines feature and billionaires use as a tax shelter. The entire ocean-facing side was a 3-story wall of seamless, storm-proof glass. The floors were heated by a geothermal system. The lighting, security, and climate control were all integrated into a smart system so complex it required its own dedicated server room. It had a glass elevator, a rooftop solar array that could power a small neighborhood, and a gray water recycling system that would have impressed NASA. I was the lead electrician for Northbridge Electric, but on this job, I was effectively the head of electrical design and implementation. The original blueprints from the architect were beautiful and functionally impossible. They had prioritized aesthetics over physics, and Northbridge got the contract because I had a reputation for fixing the unfixable designs. For 6 months, I had lived and breathed that house, pulling thousands of feet of high-gauge cable, designing load balances, and ensuring every single connection was not just to code, but perfect. This wasn't a job. It was my Sistine Chapel. My crew respected me. The general contractor, a gruff man named Sal, listened when I spoke, but the project was managed from a distance by a faceless entity. Oliver Kane was the first suit I'd seen on site who didn't look lost. He was a young lawyer, sharp, with immaculate shoes that he somehow kept clean despite the sawdust and concrete dust. He represented Azure Crest Developments, the shell corporation funding the build. He'd show up weekly with a leather briefcase, ask precise questions, and take notes. He'd watch me. I caught him a few times, standing by the framework of a door, just observing as I argued with a subcontractor. "Look, Miguel," I said one afternoon, holding a cheap plastic junction box in my hand. The spec sheet calls for marine-grade galvanized steel boxes on all exterior-facing walls. This is a 20-cent piece of plastic. It's rated for outdoor use. Miguel, the foreman for the siding crew, grumbled. "It saves us 3 days and about $10,000. It's rated for a patio in Arizona. Miguel, it's not rated for constant salt spray on a cliff facing the Pacific. It will corrode, crack, and short out the entire system in less than 2 years. It's a fire hazard. I'm not signing off on it. Get the steel boxes, or I report it to the county inspector. Your choice." Miguel cursed and stomped off. Oliver approached me, adjusting his tie. "You don't compromise easily, Ms. Clark." "Not when it comes to safety," I said, tossing the plastic box into the scrap bin. "This house is designed to last 100 years. I'm not going to be the reason it burns down in 2 because someone wanted to save 10 grand. He just nodded, a small, impressed look on his face. The client will be pleased to hear that. "Does the client even exist?" I asked, wiping my hands on a rag. The rumor mill on the site was legendary. The owner, we were told, was an anonymous investor, impossibly rich, and deeply strange. Some said it was a tech billionaire. Others, an oil sheik, Sal, the GC, claimed he'd never even spoken to the guy. All communications went through Oliver's law firm. The only thing everyone agreed on was that the owner was obsessed with details. That's why I was so surprised when the old man showed up. It was a gray Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the fog and the ocean become one. I was on the main terrace, triple-checking the weatherproofing seals on the main power feed. I saw him standing near the unfinished infinity pool, just watching. He looked to be in his mid-70s, wearing a faded flannel shirt, old denim jeans, and a pair of scuffed work boots that looked older than I was. He looked like a retired carpenter, or maybe someone's grandfather, who had wandered onto the site. "You're missing a gasket on that third conduit entry," he said. His voice was quiet, raspy, but clear over the sound of the wind. I stopped, startled. I looked closer at the entry point. He was right. A small, black rubber ring was sitting on the concrete 5 feet away. Dropped by one of my apprentices, I walked over, picked it up, and began fitting it. "Good eye," I said. "You an electrician?" "A long time ago," he said, walking closer. He moved stiffly, but with purpose. "I've been watching this build. They're usually a mess. This one is clean. Your cable runs are immaculate, logical. You don't waste material, but you don't skimp, either." I felt a flush of pride. "Thank you. We try." He pointed with his chin. "You're Morgan Clark." "I am." "You're the one who caught the flaw in the HVAC design. The architect had the main return air duct running through the same chase as the emergency fire suppression. You saved them a nightmare." I was floored. "How did you know that?" "I read the reports," he said simply. He looked at me, his eyes a pale, clear blue. "This kind of work, it's a legacy. You're building something to outlast you." We stood there for a moment, just 2 people in work clothes on a massive, empty concrete deck, looking out at the ocean. The waves crashed below, sending a fine mist up to the cliff edge. "It's just nice to be respected for the work," I said, surprising myself. The words just came out. "It's a lot different than my life at home." He didn't pry. He just waited. "My family," I explained, gesturing with my wrench. "They're in construction, too. My dad's a contractor, but he's the kind of guy who'd use the plastic box to save the money. He thinks what I do is beneath him, because I'm not the boss, but he also thinks I'm a walking bank, a free handyman who should drop everything to fix his mistakes. They don't respect the skill. They just see the utility, a tool." The old man was silent for a long time, watching the water. "It's a heavy thing," he finally said. "To be the only person in your family who sees the cracks in the foundation." "You have no idea," I muttered. "I'm just the ungrateful, overeducated tool they keep in a shed until something breaks." He turned to me, his gaze sharp and incredibly focused. "What's the worst part of it? What would they have to do or say to make you know, absolutely, that they don't see you as one of them, that you're not family anymore?" It was such a strange, personal question. I leaned back against the glass wall, a sudden, bitter laugh escaping me. "That's a dark question," I said. "I don't know. Honestly, with them, the bar is pretty low. But I guess the final nail would be the day they actually said it. The day they stopped pretending I was useful and just told me to go. The day they lined up and screamed in my face, "Get out. You're not part of this family." I said it as a half joke, an exaggeration of the scene I'd already played in my head 1,000 times. The old man didn't laugh. He just nodded, slow and deliberate, as if I'd just given him the answer to a complex equation. He looked back at the ocean. "People forget," he said, his voice barely a whisper above the wind. "They forget that words like that don't just push a person out of a house. They push the good fortune right out the door with them, and they are often surprised when it doesn't come back." He nodded at me, a quick, respectful dip of his head. "Don't let them ruin your standard, Ms. Clark. The world has enough shoddy work in it." He turned and walked away, disappearing back into the maze of steel studs and drywall. I never saw him again. The next week, Oliver Kane showed up with an emergency addendum to the contract. "The client has reviewed the safety and contingency plans," Oliver said, looking baffled. "He's well. He's increasing the budget. Significantly, he wants the backup generator capacity doubled. He wants an independent battery backup for the entire security and lighting system. And he wants all main panel breakers upgraded to the highest industrial standard." He handed me a set of revised specs. Tucked inside were 3 pages of handwritten notes, sketched on graph paper. They were detailed, technical, and brilliant, outlining a system of redundancies I hadn't even dared to propose. "Where did these come from?" I asked, staring at the precise, old-fashioned handwriting. "The client sent them over," Oliver said, shrugging. "He said you'd understand them. He also said, and I quote, 'Give Morgan Clark whatever she needs. Just don't let her use plastic boxes.'" I just thought the invisible owner was eccentric, but smart. I thought my work was finally being recognized by the person paying the bills. I had no idea I had been talking to Elliot Caro. I had no idea that our conversation on the balcony had just been recorded, witnessed, and filed, and I had no idea that I had just, half-jokingly, set the single, bizarre condition for my entire life to change. The final month at Oceanfall House was a blur of high-level problem-solving and deep professional satisfaction. While I was installing the custom-designed $8,000 light fixtures in the main atrium, the rest of my world was starting to catch fire. The lawsuit over Greg's collapsed roof wasn't just a threat anymore. It was a full-blown legal disaster. The homeowners were suing for damages, negligence, and emotional distress. Greg's insurance, which I suspected was the bare minimum he could legally carry, was refusing to pay out, citing gross deviation from approved plans. My phone rang while I was on a scaffold. 30 feet up. It was Greg. His voice was a forced, casual drawl that he only used when he was terrified. "Hey, Morgan. Hey, just calling my daughter. You know, how's the big, fancy house? It's busy. Dad, what's wrong?" "Wrong, nothing's wrong. Just a little paperwork headache. These lawyers, you know, they're just trying to squeeze me." He cleared his throat. "Listen, could you do your old man a favor? The plaintiff's lawyer is throwing around all this technical mumbo-jumbo. I'm faxing over some of the plans. Could you just look at them, you know, with your expert eye? See if you can find a way to poke holes in their argument, for the family." "Faxing," I said, balancing my phone on my shoulder. "Dad, it's 2025. Just email me the PDF. Right, email. I'll have your mother do it." An hour later, in the site trailer, I opened the file. It took me less than 30 seconds to feel the blood drain from my face. It was the structural blueprint for the roof truss system of the collapsed duplex. It was a complete joke undersized lumber, spacing at 24 inches when it should have been 16, improper load-bearing calculations for a coastal wind zone. It was a catastrophic failure waiting to happen. And then I saw it. In the bottom right corner, in the box reserved for the electrical systems review, was a signature, a clean, precise forgery of my own, right next to a stamp with my certification number. He hadn't just built it shoddy. He had used my professional license to get the shoddy plans approved. He had signed my name, without my knowledge, on an act of criminal negligence. This wasn't just his company on the line. It was my entire career, my license, my future. I drove to their house that night. The PDF printed out on the passenger seat. I didn't knock. I walked straight in. Greg was at the kitchen table, nursing a beer. I slapped the paper down in front of him. "What is this?" He squinted at it. This is the junk they're suing me over. I thought you could—" "This," I said, pointing at the signature. "This is a felony. This is forgery. Dad, you used my license." Greg had the decency to look away, but only for a second. He fell back on his oldest, most reliable defense, righteous indignation. "I had to," he boomed, standing up. The county inspector was being a pain in the ass about the electrical plan. It was just a formality to get the permit pushed through. It didn't mean anything. It means everything. It means that when this roof, which you built like a paper kite, collapsed, my name was on the approval. You've tied me to your negligence. I could lose my license over this. Dad, I could be named in the lawsuit. I could be charged. "Oh, stop being so dramatic," he spat, his face turning red. "It's just a signature. It's family. You're supposed to help me, not attack me. I put a roof over your head. And now you're trying to take it away," I yelled, my voice shaking with a rage so cold it burned. "You go to your lawyer tomorrow morning. You tell him you forged my signature. You file an affidavit admitting I had no part in this, that I never saw these plans. You fix it, or I swear to God, I will—" His face hardened. "You'd do that? You'd sell out your own father to save your own skin." "This isn't my skin, Dad. This is my life, the one I built, the one you're trying to burn down to save yourself. Yes, I will protect it." "Then you're a traitor," he whispered, his voice full of real, venomous conviction. "You're no better than the lawyers." He stormed out, leaving me alone in the kitchen, while my entire professional identity was hanging by a thread. Lena was busy building her brand on the edges of my success. She had posted a new vlog, Westport Cove's most exclusive property, my family connection aesthetic life. She'd driven to the public beach below Oceanfall House and filmed herself on the sand, with the massive glass structure looming on the cliffs behind her. She never mentioned me by name, but she talked about my family's deep ties to the construction and design world, and how we are involved in these high-level luxury projects. She was using my work, a job she didn't even understand, to get sponsorships for scented candles. I called her. "Lena, take that video down." "Why?" she said, sounding genuinely confused. "It's getting amazing engagement. That interior designer from LA just followed me." "Because you're lying. You have no connection to that house. I'm working there. You're implying you're part of it." "Morgan, relax. It's just branding. God, you're always so literal. It's not like you're the owner. You're just the electrician. It's for the family's reputation." "The family's reputation is in the toilet." "Lena, did you know Dad forged my signature on the duplex plans?" There was a pause. "Oh, God," she said, her voice dropping. "Is that going to look bad for me if that gets out?" I hung up the phone. A few days later, my mother cornered me. She came to my apartment, a place she had only visited twice, bringing with her the smell of her cloying. Calm perfume. "Morgan," she said, sitting stiffly on my sofa, refusing the coffee I offered. "We need to find a compromise." "There's no compromise for forgery. Mom, your father, he's not himself. He's under so much pressure. If you go to the lawyers, you will destroy him. You will destroy this family. We will lose the house. Lena will be humiliated." "He destroyed himself. Mom, I'm just trying to avoid being pulled into the wreckage." Her eyes hardened. "You know, your grandfather's will is complicated. The one from my side. I didn't have a grandfather. He died when I was 2. He left a small trust for you and Lena, to be paid out on my 60th birthday, but it's discretionary. I have control over the final distribution." I just stared at her. She was blackmailing me. Over an inheritance I didn't even know existed, probably for a few $1,000s. She was willing to use that to buy my silence on a criminal act. So, you're saying, I said, that if I don't let Dad potentially ruin my life, you'll steal my inheritance. I'm saying, she replied, standing up, that a family stands together, and those who stand apart, well, they shouldn't expect the benefits of the family. Think about it. Morgan, is your license really more important than your home? That's when it clicked. I stopped saying yes. The phone calls that used to end with me giving my credit card number now ended with a simple, no. Morgan, the car payment is late. That's a shame. Mom, you should probably pay it. Morgan, I need $50 for a new filter for my camera. No, Lena. Morgan, the water heater is making that noise again. Call a plumber. Dad. Every no felt like a brick I was laying in a new wall, a wall that was mine. The angrier they got, the stronger I felt, and they were getting furious. The bank had sent a certified letter foreclosure proceedings on the family home would begin in 30 days. The full weight of Greg's accumulated failures was finally, irreversibly, crashing down. That's when he came up with his plan. He didn't ask me about the forgery again. The lawsuit was forgotten. The inheritance was forgotten. A new, more immediate target was in sight, my apartment. He assembled the family, the aunts, the uncles. He told them a story. He told them about the big, bad bank, the one unlucky roof, the persecution of the small businessman. He told them he was on the brink of losing the family home, the place where all their children had played, the place their patriarch had built with his bare hands. And he told them there was one simple solution. Morgan, his successful daughter, just had to co-sign a loan, just had to put up her little apartment. A small sacrifice, he called it, to save the bedrock of this family. The phone calls from my extended family started. Morgan, your father told me what's happening, my Aunt Clara said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You have to help him. That's your home. My home is this apartment, Aunt Clara. Don't be a snob. You're getting too big for your blue-collar roots. Morgan, you think because you work in those fancy houses, you're better than us. Don't forget where you came from. The contrast was staggering. At the family home, I was a selfish, overeducated know-it-all, a traitor who didn't understand family. At Oceanfall House, I was a hero. The week before the family dinner, I was in the server room, running diagnostics on the fire suppression system. I found something. It was deep in the code, a logic error in the architect's automated plan. In the event of a fire in the West Wing, the system was programmed to vent the smoke inward, through the HVAC, before opening the exterior dampers. It would have turned the entire second floor into a convection oven in under 90 seconds. I spent 48 hours straight, no sleep, rewriting the code, rerouting the logic, and testing it with the HVAC engineers. My boss from Northbridge, Mr. Harris, came to the site himself when he heard. He looked at my diagrams, at the original flawed plan, and at my fix. He just shook his head. Morgan, he said, you didn't just save the client a headache. You probably saved the entire $20 million structure from being a total loss, and you definitely saved us from a lawsuit that would have buried our company. He clapped me on the shoulder. I'm putting you in for a promotion. I want you to be a project supervisor. You're done pulling wire, unless you want to. It's time for you to run the show. I walked out of Oceanfall House that evening with a promotion, a bonus, and the respect of my peers. I was a professional. I was a leader. I drove to my parents' house for the family crisis meeting, and the moment I walked in, I was just the girl who pulls wires, the ungrateful one, the loser in work boots, the two worlds, the one I had built and the one I was born into, could no longer exist at the same time. One of them had to break, and so, when Greg Clark finally pushed that folder across the table, demanding the last thing I had, the no was already on my lips, forged in the fire of his own making. The house was staged for a performance. My mother, Diane, had lit every warm-toned lamp, strategically placing them to hide the water stains on the ceiling and the peeling paint in the corners. The aroma of a too-dry, overcooked chicken filled the air. A forced smell of home. Lena was, of course, documenting the performance. Her phone was propped up on a tiny tripod at the end of the table, a small ring light attached. "And we're rolling," she chirped, hitting record. "Hey guys, it's Lena. Welcome back to Thankful with the Clarks. Tonight is just a simple, cozy family dinner. In this crazy world, it's so important to remember what's real. You know, your support system, your tribe." My tribe was already seated. My father, Greg, at the head of the table, drumming his fingers. My mother, opposite him, her face a mask of strained hospitality. My Aunt Clara and Uncle Ben, brought in as emotional reinforcements, looking hungry and self-important. I slid into my usual seat, the wobbly one. Greg waited until my mother had placed the platter of chicken on the table. He waited until everyone had a plate. He cleared his throat, a sound that commanded silence. "We're here tonight," he began, his voice taking on the somber, important tone he used when he was about to ask for a sacrifice, "because this family is in crisis." Lena, to her credit, didn't even flinch. She just zoomed the camera in slightly on Greg's face. "The bank," Greg continued. "Those bloodsuckers they're calling in the note, they've given us 30 days. If we can't show them a new source of capital, they're going to seize this house," Aunt Clara gasped, a perfect, practiced sound of shock. "They're going to take our home," Diane whispered, placing a hand on her heart. It was a good performance. She'd known for a week. "Now," Greg said, his eyes scanning the table. "A family doesn't let that happen. A family pulls together. A family gathers its resources. Everyone has to be willing to stand in the gap and share the burden." His eyes, heavy and demanding, landed on me. The entire table followed his gaze. I was the focal point, the solution, the sacrifice. He reached down beside his chair and pulled up a worn leather briefcase. He clicked it open, pulled out a thick manila folder, and slid it across the table. It pushed aside my silverware and stopped, perfectly centered on my plate. "This is the solution," he said, tapping the folder. He was smiling now, a magnanimous patriarch who had solved the problem for everyone. "The bank has already agreed. It's a simple collateral transfer. Your apartment, Morgan, it's got the equity. You just sign on this new loan, and the crisis is over." He leaned back, triumphant. "You just need to sign, Morgan. That's all. And you'll save this family. You'll save our home." I opened the folder. Lena's phone was still recording. Catching the sound of the paper, it wasn't a collateral transfer, it was a second mortgage, with me as the sole guarantor. The terms were predatory. The interest rate was nearly 12%. If a single payment was missed, the bank would immediately seize my apartment. Not his company, not the family house, my apartment. I would be wiped out, and he would have a fresh line of credit. The risk was 100% mine. The benefit was 100% his. "No," I said, closing the folder. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of expectation. It was the silence of a shockwave. "What did you say?" Greg asked, his smile faltering. I said no. "I'm not signing this." I pushed the folder back toward him. "This isn't sharing the burden, Dad. This is just me taking on all of your debt, and you taking on none of the risk." I kept my voice calm. I kept it level. "If you want to save the house, let's talk about real solutions. You can sell the new Ford F-350. That's $80,000 right there. You can cut your company's expenses. You can take a salary cut, Mom, from the company books. And you, Dad, can finally stand in front of that judge and admit what you did in the duplex lawsuit. Face it. Don't try to pile more debt onto me to hide from it." Greg's face went from pale to a deep, blotchy red. He wasn't a man who responded well to logic, only to emotion, and I had just rejected his ungrateful, he whispered, the word sharp and ugly. "You sit in my house, at my table, eating my food, and you dare to talk to me about my truck." He started to tick them off on his fingers, a litany I had heard my whole life. I paid for the shirt on your back. I paid for the braces on your teeth. I paid for every meal you ate in this house for 18 years. He conveniently forgot the 10 years I'd been paying him back, with interest. My mother saw her cue. He's right. Morgan, your father is in pain, and you're just arguing. You're just like this, always. Her voice was a disappointed sigh. Lena is the only one who has ever made us proud. She's building something. She's trying. You just know how to argue and tear things down. The entire table was quiet, nodding in agreement with this assessment. I was the difficult one. Lena, the influencer who still had them pay her car insurance, was the pride of the family. Lena, sensing her moment, chimed in, though she was careful to keep her voice light, as if for the camera. Seriously, Morgan, why are you always like this? It's so heavy. Dad is offering you a chance to be a hero. And you're turning it into this drama. If you don't want to help, fine. But stop playing the victim. You loser in work boots. A loser in work boots. That's all I was to them. A tool that had suddenly refused to work. And just like that, the dam of my silence, the one I had so carefully maintained for a decade, finally broke. The shirt on my back, Dad, I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the table. I've got my work shirt on. I paid for it. The food I ate. I've been paying for your groceries, off and on, since I was 20. The braces, I paid for them. Remember you borrowed the money from my college fund, the one I never got to use, and I had to pay the orthodontist in installments from my first job as an apprentice. I turned to him, and for the first time, I wasn't just tired, I was done. Let's talk about what I've paid for. I paid the $6,000 in property taxes last year, so the county wouldn't put a lien on this house. I paid the hospital bill, all $8,000, $200 of it when you had your gallbladder out, Dad, because you'd let your company's health insurance lapse. I've been fixing your shoddy wiring, repairing your leaking roof, and bailing you out of your bad decisions for my entire adult life. I love you. I do. But love is not an unlimited credit card, and you just got declined. Greg's face was beyond red. It was purple. He stood up, knocking his chair over with a crash. The room went dead silent. He pointed that finger, the one stained with grease and sawdust, the one that had been directing my life, my entire worth, since I was a child. He pointed it right between my eyes. "If you won't stand with this family," he roared, his voice cracking with the sheer force of his rage, "you are not part of this family." He took a breath, his whole body shaking. "Get out," the words echoed in the small, damp dining room. No one moved. Aunt Clara, who had been so vocal about my snobbery, suddenly found the pattern on her plate fascinating. Uncle Ben just stared into his water glass. My mother just looked at Greg, her expression not one of horror, but of relief. The decision had been made. Their silence was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of agreement. It was the everyone agreed from the title of my life. I looked at Lena. The camera was still running, pointed right at me. She had the audacity to be smirking, a genuine, tiny, triumphant smirk. "Well," she whispered, leaning toward me and covering her mouth, as if sharing a secret. "Guess this part isn't going on the vlog, okay?" Then she leaned back, and in a voice just for me, she said, "Just go. Morgan, God, you're just making this heavy. Just go." I looked around the room. I saw the water stain on the ceiling, the one I had patched 3 times. I saw the flickering dining room light, the one with the faulty switch I had rewired. I saw a family, in a house I had literally and figuratively held together, sitting in judgment of me for finally dropping the load, and I felt nothing, just an immense, hollow lightness. I stood up. I picked up my jacket from the back of the wobbly chair. I looked at my father, who was still panting, his fingers still half raised. "Okay," I said. It was the only word I had left. "From now on, consider me never part of this." I turned and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently behind me. As the latch clicked, I could hear, faintly, Greg's voice. Not a roar this time, but a muttered, confident grumble. She'll be back. She'll come crawling back before the week is out. But I wouldn't, and they had no idea what they had just done. They had no idea that the specific, legalistic, and publicly witnessed phrase, "You are not part of this family," had just been spoken. They didn't know that my father's curse was, in fact, a key, and that it had just unlocked a $20 million door. I drove. I don't remember the route. It was just an automatic function. My hands on the wheel, my foot on the gas. I didn't go to the pier this time. I went to the one place that was mine. My apartment is on the third floor of a characterless 1980s building with thin walls and beige carpets. I bought it 3 years ago with a down payment I had scraped together from 1,000 hours of overtime, of emergency night calls, of saying no to things I wanted so I could save one more dollar. It was small, it was unremarkable, and it was the only place on earth where I felt safe. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked through the dark, toed off my work boots, and sat on my inexpensive, functional sofa. The silence of the apartment was absolute. It was a profound, ringing quiet after the noise of my father's rage and the brittle tension of my mother's house. I just sat there, in the dark, and let the words replay. Get out. You are not part of this family. Loser in work boots. Lena is the only one who has ever made us proud. A strange, two-part emotion settled over me. There was the pain, a dull, familiar ache in my chest, the pain of the final, undeniable confirmation that I was, and had always been, the outsider, the tool, the disappointment. But underneath the pain was something else, something I was almost afraid to name. It was lightness. It was the terrible, sharp relief of a heavy, heavy chain being cut. For 32 years, I had been tethered to their expectations, to their crises, to their bottomless pit of need. I had been pulling their weight, repairing their mistakes, and trying, uselessly, to earn a love that was clearly conditional on my total, silent submission, and tonight I had refused. I had said no, and they had, in response, done the one thing I had always feared. They had cast me out, and I was still here. The world hadn't ended. I was still breathing. I was in my home, which I had paid for. The final, terrible threat they had always held over me, the threat of withdrawing family, had been used, and I had survived. In fact, in the dark, I felt a slow, creeping sense of freedom. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, a jarring, violent sound in the quiet. I flinched. I expected it to be my mother, calling to yell, or perhaps my father, calling to add another curse. It was a text, from my cousin, Mark. He and his wife had been at the table, silent. Hey Morgan, I'm so sorry about tonight. What my uncle said, man, it was way out of line. I stared at the words. He was the only one. I typed back, it's okay. Mark, you don't have to apologize. He responded immediately, no, it's not okay. I should have said something, but you know how he is. Everyone's terrified of him. I wanted to say you didn't deserve that. Thanks. Mark, it means a lot. Another message popped up, from a number I didn't recognize. It was just a video file. No text, no explanation. I felt a cold lurch of anxiety. I tapped it. The video was shaky, filmed from a low angle, but the audio was perfectly, horrifyingly clear. It was Lena's camera. She must have left it recording. The video started just as my father was standing up. It captured the chair falling, his red face, his pointing finger. If you won't stand with this family, you are not part of this family at out. The video panned, catching my mother's stony agreement. It caught my aunt and uncle looking down. It caught Lena's own, subtle, satisfied smirk, just before she whispered, "Just go, Morgan." The video ended. I felt sick, but the practical, survivalist part of my brain took over. This was evidence. I didn't know for what, but I knew my father. I knew his history of lies and forgery. This was proof. Proof of what was said. Proof of my disownment. I saved the file. downloading it directly to my phone's hard drive, and then uploading it to my private cloud storage. I thought, vaguely, that it might be useful if Greg tried to come after me legally for something, if he tried to claim I owed him money, or if he tried to get me fired. It was a shield. Nothing more. I turned the phone off. I went to bed. I did not cry. I just slept. It was the deep, dreamless sleep of the truly, completely exhausted. The alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. It was still dark. It was the start of another workday. For a disorienting second, I lay there, the events of the night before feeling like a bizarre, acidic dream, but the hollow feeling in my chest was real. I got up, I made coffee, I put on my uniform, I pulled on my boots. The loser in work boots was going to work. My family was gone. My promotion was real. My job was waiting. I had a crew to manage, a high-voltage system to finalize. Life, apparently, went on. I was grabbing my heavy tool bag, my keys in my hand, heading out the door. When my phone rang, I almost didn't answer it. It was too early for a personal call. Too early for anything but an emergency. I checked the screen. Oliver Kane. My blood went cold. My first thought, instantly, something is wrong at Oceanfall. The fire system. The server. I made a mistake. I answered, my voice all business. This is Morgan. Ms. Clark. Morgan. Thank God I reached you. His voice was not the smooth, polished lawyer voice I was used to. It was urgent and strained, but still calm. I apologize for the hour, he said. I know this is incredibly early, but I need you to come to my office, now, as soon as you can. Mr. Kane, what's wrong? I asked, shifting my tool bag. Is it the site? Did something trip? Is the new generator offline? What, no? No. The site is fine. Everything's fine. He took a breath. This is a different matter entirely. It's related to Oceanfall. But Morgan, this is a legal matter, a personal one. I don't understand. It's about an old acquaintance of yours, he said, and I could hear the rustle of papers on his end. A man who mentioned you in his will. A will. My mind, foggy with lack of sleep and emotional trauma, just stalled. A will who I don't know anyone. And then, the image flashed in my mind. The old, kind man on the balcony. The scuffed boots, the pale, clear eyes. The old man, I whispered. The old man on the terrace. The one who asked me about the wiring. There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. It is imperative that you come to my office, Oliver said, his voice dropping. It appears Ms. Clark, it appears something has been triggered. Triggered what? Like an alarm. Like a clause, he said, sounding stunned himself. A very specific, conditional clause in the last will and testament of Elliot Caro. Our firm received an automated, high-priority notification late last night, around 9:40 p.m. The time, it was minutes after I'd walked out. I don't understand, I said again, my keys digging into my palm. The notification, it was accompanied by a digital file, a video file. I stopped breathing. The tool bag in my hand suddenly felt like it weighed 500 pounds. I let it thud to the floor. A video. My voice was barely a whisper. What video? Oliver Kane took a deep professional breath. He sounded like a man reading a legal citation. Something so bizarre it required absolute precision. A video of a family argument. Ms. Clark, the trust's monitoring system, which Mr. Caro established, was searching for a specific, legally binding, verbal phrase. The notification was triggered the moment the audio monitors identified your father, Greg Clark, stating, and I am quoting the official transcript, "You are not part of this family. Get out." A cold, electric shock went up my spine, colder than any open-air wire I'd ever touched. "Get here as fast as you can." "Morgan," Oliver said, his professional calm finally breaking, "there's a house you need to see." I hung up the phone. I didn't go to work. I drove, on autopilot again. but this time to the glass and steel towers of downtown Westport Cove. I walked into the plushest law office in the city, wearing my steel-toed boots and my Northbridge electric work shirt, smelling faintly of coffee and copper wire. Oliver met me at the elevator. He didn't look like he had slept. He just pointed. In here, he led me to the largest conference room, the one with the panoramic view of the harbor. On the enormous, polished wood table, which was otherwise completely empty, sat a single, thick, blue-bound stack of papers. The cover sheet was simple. The last will and testament of Elliot Caro, and right below it, an attached file, Addendum C, the Oceanfall Contingency. I sat down. My work boots looked obscene on the plush, antique Persian rug. The conference room was silent, the air tasting of floor polish and old money. Oliver Kane sat opposite me, at the head of the impossibly long, gleaming mahogany table. He looked at the blue-bound document between us, then at me. Please, Morgan, I know this is a shock. Let me attempt to explain this in a linear fashion. It is the only way I can make sense of it myself. I just nodded, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. The man you met on the terrace, Oliver began. The old man in the flannel shirt was Elliot Caro. The owner, I whispered, the sole owner, visionary, an anonymous funder of the entire Azure Crest Developments portfolio. Yes, Oceanfall House was his final project, his masterpiece. Oliver leaned forward, lacing his fingers. To understand Elliot, you have to understand his past. He was one of the wealthiest private real estate developers in the country. He started as a tradesman himself, an iron worker, but he was private, he was driven, he was obsessed. He paused, and his lawyer's professionalism softened into something more human. Nearly 35 years ago, Elliot lost his only child, his son, David. David was 20 years old, a student at a university back east. He died in a dormitory fire. I felt a cold prickle. A fire. An electrical fire, Oliver said, his eyes holding mine. The investigation found that the contractor who built the dorm, a new state-of-the-art building, had cut corners to save money. Specifically, the subcontractor had used aluminum wiring in place of copper and had used fittings that were not rated for the load. It was shoddy work. It was negligence. It was a cost-saving measure that cost Elliot his son. I just stared at him, the server room at Oceanfall flashing in my mind, the flawed fire suppression, the plastic boxes, my father's forged signature. Elliot Caro spent the rest of his life, and his considerable fortune, at war with shoddy workmanship. Oliver continued. He became obsessed with integrity, with safety, with building things that were not just beautiful, but perfect, permanent. He hated subcontractors who cut corners. He hated contractors well. He hated men like your father. He knew who my father was. Morgan, he knew everything about you. After that fire, he developed a system. He never just hired a firm. He vetted them. He observed them. He had a private team of retired, expert tradesmen who would pose as site workers, or inspectors, or just old men in flannel shirts. He tapped the blue will. He was the one who insisted Northbridge Electric get the contract for Oceanfall, and he was the one who insisted you, specifically, be assigned as lead. He had read your file. He had seen your inspection reports from other jobs. He knew you were the one who always found the flaws, the one who cost the company money by refusing to sign off, not the one who saved it. Those handwritten notes, I said, the pieces clicking into place. The ones on the generator specs were his, Oliver finished. He was testing you, and you were passing every test. He watched you argue with Miguel about the galvanized steel boxes. He was in the trailer, unseen. When you presented your solution for the HVAC fire venting flaw, he saw someone who built with a conscience. Oliver took a deep breath. Then he met you. That day on the balcony, he was impressed. He told me it was the first time he'd met a builder who was as angry about the small things as he was. He came back to this office the next day. He was alive then. Very much. But he was also dying. Pancreatic cancer. He knew he didn't have long. He came to me and he said, "Oliver, I'm changing the will. I found the heir to Oceanfall." He said, "I'm leaving the house to the woman who built it, the one who understands it." He said he was leaving it to his electrician. I couldn't speak. My throat was tight. "But," Oliver said, raising a finger, "he had a condition, a very Elliot condition. He was a strange man, Morgan, but he was brilliant. He told me, a person with that much integrity is usually an outcast in their own family, especially a family of takers like the one she's described. He had looked up your father's company. He saw the pending lawsuits. He saw the shoddy work. He told me, that house is a prize. If I give it to her, those vultures will descend. They will use their family bond as a chain, and they will tear her apart to get their hands on it. She will never be free to have it. So, he created a contingency." Oliver turned the blue-bound document around and pointed to a tab labeled Addendum C, the Oceanfall Contingency. The clause states that the entirety of the Oceanfall House estate, its grounds, and the $2 million maintenance trust that funds it would be transferred to you, Morgan Clark, on one condition, and only one condition. He looked me right in the eye. That verifiable, time-stamped, and legally binding proof was obtained that your primary blood family, defined here as Greg Clark, Diane Clark, and Lena Clark, had formally, verbally, and publicly disowned you, that they had, in effect, severed the chain themselves. "That's insane," I breathed. "That's not a real thing. That's a fairy tale." Elliot Caro was a billionaire, Morgan. He made his own real things. He set up a private trust, managed by this firm, with a single, bizarre mandate to monitor. We've had a soft digital monitoring system pointed at your family's public-facing digital footprint for 3 months. Specifically, your sister Lena's social media. I think my jaw actually dropped. "Last night," Oliver said, "at 9:38 in the evening, your sister Lena posted a video to her Instagram story. It was shaky, it was dark, but the audio was crystal clear. She was, I assume, attempting to film your father's performance. She filmed it. She did. And she posted it. Our system, which was scanning for keywords, instantly flagged the audio. It captured the file 30 seconds before she deleted it. The trigger phrase was isolated, verified against your father's voice print, which we already had, and time-stamped. The system automatically executed the clause. I was woken up at 9:45 p.m. by an automated call from the trust. He turned a large monitor on the wall. "This," he said, "is the legal proof." He hit play. There it was. My father's purple face, my mother's silent agreement, and the audio, clear as a bell. "If you won't stand with this family, you are not part of this family. Get out." The video ended. "As of 9:38 p.m. last night," Oliver said, turning off the screen, "you became the beneficiary of the Morgan Clark Coastal Foundation and the sole proprietor of Oceanfall House." He slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the polished table. It had my name on it, written in that same, precise, old-fashioned script from the generator specs. I broke the wax seal. "Ms. Clark, if you are reading this, then 2 things have happened. The first is that I am gone. The second is that your family has finally done what I suspected they would. The worst has happened, and in doing so, the best has happened. They have finally shown you their true faces, and you are finally free. Do not, my dear girl, ever give great assets to people who use family as a chain. Family is a word they use to justify theft, to demand sacrifice, to normalize their own failures. I've seen it 1,000 times. You are not one of them. You are a builder. They are takers. I am leaving you the house because you, of all the people who touched it, were the only one who built it with a conscience. It is yours. I have seen what you see. I know you will not let it become a monument to greed, or a backdrop for vapid, empty lives. Make it a monument to good work. The world needs more of that. Yours, E. C. I looked up from the letter. My hands were shaking. 12 hours, I whispered. Just 12 hours ago, I was sitting in my truck. I had just been thrown out of a house with a leaking roof and faulty wiring. I was a loser in work boots. And now, Oliver said, a small, weary smile on his face, you are the owner of a $20,200,000 mansion, built to withstand a Category 5 hurricane. As you said, life is ironic. He leaned forward, his tone becoming serious again. There is one final detail. The trust is absolute. You must accept. If you refuse, the entire estate, the house, the trust, the $20 million is immediately dissolved and transferred, in its entirety, to a collection of national tradesmen's guilds and technical colleges. He paused, letting the weight of it land. To be perfectly clear, Morgan, whether you accept this, or you decline it, your father, your mother, and your sister are explicitly named in this will as excluded parties. They will never, under any circumstances, see one single penny of this. This was Elliot's final, perfect piece of construction. I sat there for a long time. The shock was a high-voltage hum under my skin. I wasn't rich. I was responsible. I looked at the letter, at Elliot's words. Make it a monument to good work. I looked up at Oliver. If I accept, I said, my voice hoarse. If I become the director of this foundation, what can I do with it? What can I do with the house? Oliver Kane's professional mask finally broke, and he gave me a real, genuine smile. According to the trust's charter, which Mr. Caro wrote himself, he said, you can do anything that fits your heart and your electrician's conscience. Oliver didn't just give me a key. He gave me a slim, heavy black card and a small fob. The gate, the front door, the elevator, the server room. It's all keyed to you now. Morgan, he said, handing them over. The former project-level access codes were all wiped the moment the trust was executed. You are the only one who can get in. I drove my battered Northbridge electric work truck, the one with the ladder rack and the dent in the rear bumper, up the long, winding private road to Oceanfall. The gates were massive, crafted from ipe wood and brushed steel. I held the card up to the reader, and with a silent, hydraulic hiss, they swung open for me. The first time I stepped inside Oceanfall House as its owner, the air was different. Before, it had smelled of sawdust, paint thinner, and new grout. Now, it was just the faint, clean scent of sea air and the oiled Brazilian hardwood floors. The house was in a state of suspended animation, waiting. Elliot had furnished it with sparse, perfect, mid-century modern pieces. It wasn't a home yet. It was a statement. The afternoon sun was hitting the 3-story glass wall, and the entire house was flooded with golden light. The polished floors reflected the ocean, making it feel like you were walking on water. I walked to the center of the great room. My footsteps were the only sound, a solid thud on the thick planks. I ran my hand along a wall, feeling for the seam. I found it the hidden panel I had designed. I pressed the corner, and a section of the wall clicked open, revealing the main smart panel. My work, my wiring, every cable was labeled. Every run was immaculate. Every connection was perfect. I had built this. I had bled for this, cried over this, and perfected this. Hello, house, I whispered to the panel. I touched the all-on diagnostic. Instantly, the entire house came to life. The lights, which were all set to a warm 30% default, glowed. The climate control system gave a low, powerful hum, pulling in fresh, filtered air from the ocean. The glass elevator on the far wall lit up, its simple up button glowing a soft white. I walked over to it, stepped inside, and pressed the button for the terrace. The ride was silent, smooth. The hydraulics I had personally specified and inspected. It was like rising through the light. I stepped out onto the main terrace. The wind was high, whipping my hair back, but the thick glass barriers cut the noise to a deep, resonant whoosh. The sea was a violent, beautiful mess of whitecaps, stretching to the horizon. I stood in the exact spot, the spot where I had stood with Elliot Caro. my hands dirty, my clothes smelling of copper, the spot where I had joked. Get out. You're not part of this family. The irony was so thick, so heavy, I could barely breathe. My father's words were meant to be a curse. They were meant to be an eviction, a final act of banishment. He had thrown me out of his collapsing, rotten house. And in doing so, he had, by the sheer, bizarre magic of one old man's conscience, thrown me directly into this. I was out of their house. I was standing in my own. The scale of it threatened to pull me under. The $20 million, the responsibility, the loneliness of it. I was standing in a palace, completely alone, having lost the only family I had ever known, even if they were a toxic, parasitic version of one. I couldn't do this alone. I wouldn't. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling with the screen. I scrolled past the texts from Mark, past the missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I found my crew group chat, Jasmine Ortiz and Marco Ruiz, my two best friends from Northbridge, the ones who had covered for me, laughed with me, and shared cold coffee with me in sight trailers for 6 years. I hit dial. Morgan, Jasmine answered, her voice all noise and cheer. What's up? Boss Harris already told us about your promotion, project supervisor. Marco owes me $20. I told him you'd be running the whole damn company in 5 years. Hey, Jazz, I said, my voice thick. Hey, Marco, I know you're on speaker. Hey, Clark, Marco's voice yelled. Don't spend that new supervisor money all in one place. Guys, I said, leaning against the cold steel barrier, I need a favor. I'm moving, and I need help. Moving now, Jasmine said. It's like 3 p.m. Where are you moving to? You're not going to believe me. Try us. Just get the truck, meet me at the service entrance to Oceanfall House, and bring a 6-pack, and maybe a pizza. There was a long silence. Oceanfall, Marco said, his voice dropping the joke tone, like the $20 million ghost house on the cliff Oceanfall. Yeah, I said, a tear finally, stupidly, rolling down my cheek. That one. What the hell did you do? Morgan? He asked, not accusing, just baffled. I got kicked out of my parents' house. And I seem to have inherited this one. It's a long story. Another silence. Then, Jasmine. We're on our way, and we're bringing 2 6-packs. An hour later, their old beat-up pickup truck, the one Marco used for side jobs, rolled up to the service gate. I opened it for them. They got out, looking stunned, holding a pizza box and a case of beer. They stared at the house, then at me. Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. You're not kidding. I'm not kidding. I told them. I told them everything. The dinner, the forgery, the words, get out. And then, the will, Elliot Caro, the condition, the video. By the time I was finished, Jasmine was openly crying, and Marco was just staring at the main electrical panel, which I had left open. Holy shit, Marco whispered, his voice full of a tradesman's awe. He pointed at my work. He gave you the house because you're good. Jasmine just hugged me, fiercely. I'm so glad he did. Marco cracked a beer and handed it to me. So, he said, taking a swig from his own, you are, without a doubt, the only electrician I know who has increased her net worth by, $500,000 every time she have installed a breaker. Your dad is the dumbest son of a bitch on this planet. We laughed. It was a real, true, barking laugh that echoed in the enormous, empty room. My move took one trip. My old truck and Marco's, loaded with the few boxes from my apartment, my clothes, my books, my tools. They helped me carry my mattress, the simple, queen-sized one from my apartment, into the great room. Which bedroom do you want? Jasmine asked, gesturing at the 6 identical oceanfront master suites. I don't know, I said. This one, I pointed to a simple room, smaller than the others, on the main floor. It had been Elliot's study. It was lined with shelves. It felt respectful. I kept the fine, Simple wooden desk and chair he had chosen. The rest of the house, it felt too big, too much. "What are you going to do with all this?" "Morgan," Marco asked, sitting on the counter of the chef's kitchen, which was worth more than my apartment. I looked at Elliot's letter, which was still in my pocket. Make it a monument to good work. I had an idea. It had been forming since I read the letter. "I know what I'm doing with the bottom floor," I said, walking to the elevator. The lowest level wasn't a basement. It was a 5,000 square foot, climate-controlled space with reinforced concrete floors and its own loading bay. It was designed to be a car collector's garage. "This," I said, as the doors opened, "is going to be a workshop." "A workshop for what?" Jasmine asked. "For free? For the kids at the community center, the ones I volunteer with, the ones who, like me, are told they're not college material, the ones whose families think they're just thumper kids. I'm going to fill this place with workbenches, with diagnostic tools, with soldering stations, with wiring rigs. I'm going to teach them a trade, a real one, with standards." "The Oceanfall Trade Initiative," I said, the name just coming to me. Oliver, when I called him later that night to tell him my plan, was silent for a full 10 seconds. "The Oceanfall Trade Initiative," he repeated, and I could hear the smile in his voice. He would have loved that. "I'll get the foundation paperwork drawn up tomorrow. It's perfect. Morgan." Jasmine and Marco left around 10, leaving me with half a pizza and a new life. I stood in the great room. The house was quiet, just the sound of the ocean, a distant, reassuring rhythm. The feeling was overwhelming. It wasn't power. It wasn't the thrill of wealth. It was responsibility. It was the heavy, solid, satisfying weight of a perfectly engineered tool placed in my hands. I wasn't rich. I was a guardian. That night, I didn't sleep in any of the $1,000,000 beds. I pulled my old mattress, the one from my apartment, into the center of the living room. I didn't even use sheets. I just used my sleeping bag. I turned off every single light. The room was black, except for the massive, 3-story wall of glass, which was lit up by a full moon. The ocean was silver. The stars were endless. It was the first time in 10 years I had gone to sleep without a knot in my stomach. The first time I wasn't afraid of a 5 a.m. phone call, a knock on the door, a text message demanding money, or time, or a piece of my soul. I was safe. I woke up to the sun. It was blinding, rising out of the ocean, painting the room orange and gold. I felt rested, for the first time, maybe ever. I went to the kitchen, a kitchen I now technically owned, and used the built-in $1,000 machine to make one perfect cup of coffee. I sat on the cold floor, leaning against the glass, and sipped it. And then, I turned on my phone. It lit up like a bomb. 19 missed calls, 41 text messages, from my mother, my father, my Aunt Clara, my Uncle Ben, my cousins. The news was out. Westport Cove was a small town, and the sale of a $20 million house, transferred overnight to the town's loser in work boots, was the biggest story they'd had in a decade. The first text I read was from my mother, Morgan. "This is a terrible misunderstanding. Your father was just upset. You need to call us right now. This is family property. You can't just steal it." A cold, familiar dread mixed with a new, hard resolve. I drank my coffee. They knew, and they were coming. Westport Cove is a town built on two things: old fishing money and new money gossip. The news spread faster than a grass fire. It wasn't just a rumor. It was a confirmed, public record. The $20 million Oceanfall estate, the crown jewel of the coastline, had been transferred. Not to a tech billionaire, not to a foreign investor, but to Morgan Clark, the electrician girl, the loser in work boots. The group chats in town, the ones Lena lived and died by, were melting down. How, why, what was the story? For Greg Clark, it was not just a shock. It was a profound, personal betrayal. He had spent his entire life looking up at houses like that, filled with a bitter, jealous longing. He had boasted to his bar buddies that he was connected to the project, that the owner was a personal friend. that he might even get the bid for the landscaping. He had built an entire fantasy of his own importance on the proximity of my work, and now, the daughter he had thrown out, the one he had deemed not part of the family, was the queen of the castle. The humiliation was absolute. It took them 3 days to muster their attack. I was in the workshop, the former subterranean garage. It was beginning to look like something. I had spent a good chunk of the initial $2 million trust on equipment. Not fancy cars, but industrial-grade workbenches, diagnostic oscilloscopes, high-end soldering stations, and a dozen computers loaded with CAD and electrical design software. The first class of the Oceanfall Trade Initiative was in session. It consisted of 2 kids, Mason, who was 19, and Sarah, who was 20. Both had been in my old volunteer class at the community center. Both had been told by their families that trade school was a waste and they should just get a real job. I was standing with Mason at a workbench, showing him how to properly wire a 3-way switch on a diagnostic board. See, the traveler wire is what confuses people. I was explaining. But it's simple. It's just a path for the current to choose. You're just building it a choice. That's, Mason said. His eyes lit up. Okay, that makes more sense than my uncle fixing the light in the hallway. That's when the chime on my phone went off. It wasn't a text. It was a silent alert from the house's security system, the one I had designed. A vehicle was at the main gate, the wrong vehicle. I pulled up the camera feed on my phone. My heart, which had been so calm for 3 days, gave a low, heavy thud. It was Greg's old, rust-spotted Ford pickup, and streaming out of it, onto the expensive inlaid stone in front of my gate, were Greg, Diane, and Lena. They were dressed up, not in their usual, sloppy house clothes. My mother was in her Sunday best, the beige suit she wore to funerals. Lena was in a sharp, black blazer, as if for a business meeting. Greg was in his one good polo shirt, the one he wore to bid on jobs. They looked prepared for a corporate negotiation, but their faces were masks of pure, condensed fury. "Hey, guys," I said to Mason and Sarah, keeping my voice perfectly calm. "We're going to take a 15-minute break. Why don't you 2 go up to the kitchen? The fancy machine makes a pretty decent hot chocolate." "Cool," Sarah said, oblivious, already heading for the glass elevator. The moment the elevator doors closed, I called Oliver Kane. "They're here, Oliver," I said, my voice low. "I expected as much," he replied, his voice all business. "I'm on my way. I'm 10 minutes out. The estate has a private security firm on retainer. As per the trust, they are on site, in a discreet car, at the top of the drive. They are under your command. Their instructions are to observe and prevent, not to engage, unless you are threatened. Do you feel threatened?" I looked at the phone, at the video feed of my father jabbing his finger at the camera mounted on the gate. "Not yet," I said. "Just tell them to be visible. I'll meet them at the gate." I walked. I didn't run. Up to the main floor and out the massive front door. The 2 security men, dressed in unassuming black polos and slacks, were already standing near the gate, inside the property line. They were large, calm men. I nodded at them. I walked to the intercom panel. Just inside the steel gate, I pressed the talk button. "Hello?" I said. My voice was amplified, clear and calm, over the external speaker. My mother jumped. They hadn't seen me. "Morgan," Greg barked, striding up to the bars. He physically grabbed the steel bars and shook them, as if testing for weakness. "Morgan, open this damn gate. Now." "This is a family matter," Diane called out, her voice high and shrill, performing for the security guards. "You tell your bodyguards to leave. This is private." I took a breath. The sea air was cold. "Good afternoon," I said, my voice still coming through the speaker. "You're right. This is a family matter, and because it's a family matter, with this family, I'm required to have witnesses. My lawyer is on his way. You can wait, or you can leave." "Your lawyer," Lena spat, stepping forward. She looked at me, at my simple work shirt and jeans, and then at the massive glass house behind me. Her face was a toxic mix of jealousy and disgust. "You can't be serious. Are you an electrician going to have a lawyer talk to your own family?" "Yes," I said. Just then, Oliver's sleek, black sedan pulled up behind their truck. He got out, adjusting his suit jacket, and picked up his leather briefcase. He looked like a surgeon arriving for a procedure. "Greg, Diane, Lena," he said, nodding curtly. He walked to stand beside me, on my side of the gate. "Morgan has asked me to be present, now. What precisely is the nature of this visit?" Greg saw the official, expensive power of Oliver, and his entire demeanor shifted. The rage was replaced by a false, oily charm. "Mr. Kane, Oliver, thank God," Greg said, spreading his hands in a gesture of a reasonable man. "This is all just a terrible, terrible misunderstanding, a family squabble. That's all." He turned his focus to me, his eyes full of fake, paternal warmth. "Morgan, honey, that night at dinner, I was angry. I was scared I was losing my house. I said things a father shouldn't say. You know, I didn't mean it. Get out. That's just talk. You're my daughter. You're always part of this family." I looked at him. The performance was good, almost believable. "So," I said, my voice quiet. No speaker this time. "You're saying that you didn't mean it, that it wasn't a real statement." "Exactly," Greg said, grabbing the opening, relieved. "It was just a fit of temper. You know my temper." "I do," I said. "The problem is, the man who owned this house also knew it. I had prepared for this. I pulled a thin, laminated document from my back pocket. It was a single page, an abridged summary of Addendum C, drafted by Oliver. "According to the last will of Elliot Caro," I read, "this house and the entire estate were to be transferred to me only upon the condition that I was formally, verbally, and publicly disowned by my primary blood relatives." Greg's smile froze. "The will," I continued, "specifically defined that as a clear verbal statement of exclusion, such as 'you are not part of this family,' delivered by you, Greg Clark. It was witnessed, it was recorded, and it was, according to the trust, a legally binding trigger event. Your words, Dad, were the key. You didn't mean it. Well, Elliot Caro did." Diane's face went white. She understood. "This is illegal," she shrieked, dropping the calm act. "You tricked us. You set this up. You owe us. What about all the money we spent on you? What about the food? The clothes? The roof over your head for 18 years? You owe us that." I had prepared for that, too. I pulled a second folded paper from my other pocket. "I'm glad you brought up reimbursement. Mom," I said, unfolding it, "I've also been keeping records. Let's see. We have the $8,200 for Dad's gallbladder surgery, which I paid, the $6,000 for the property taxes last spring, the $2,000 for the new water heater, the $1,200 for your car insurance, Dad, the loans to Lena for her business totaling, I don't know, around $4,000, and my personal estimate for 10 years of unpaid, on-call electrical, plumbing, and roofing repairs. I'd put that at a conservative $25,000, minimum, by my count. You're still about $37,000 in the hole, but I'll tell you what, you can keep the cost of raising me as a credit. We'll call it even." Diane was silent, her mouth opening and closing. Lena stepped up, her face twisted. "You bitch," she hissed. "You're just a thief. You stole this. This was our family's chance. You met that old man. You seduced him. You brainwashed him. You probably told him lies about us. You stole this from us." "That's enough," Oliver said, his voice cutting through the air like a razor. "I'm going to say this once. I was Mr. Caro's legal counsel. Mr. Caro began observing Morgan Clark's professional conduct 6 months before he ever spoke a word to her. He was aware of your father's, Mr. Clark's, reputation for shoddy work, just as he was aware of the lawsuit regarding the forged signature." Greg recoiled as if struck. "Mr. Caro's decision, Oliver continued, was based on months of observation, recorded evidence, and his own personal expert judgment. Your daughter, Lena, was kind enough to provide the final, legally binding proof via her public Instagram account. This is the most ironclad, legally vetted, and thoroughly documented inheritance I have ever had the privilege of executing. You have no claim. You have no standing. You are, in the eyes of this estate, trespassers. Greg looked defeated. He looked old, but only for a second. The old salesman, the con man, had one last play. He tried to laugh. Okay, so it's yours, my daughter, the millionaire. I get it. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, but it was the plead of a shark. Morgan, think about it. What does a girl like you need with all this? It's too much. Let's just be smart. Let's start over. We sell the house, 20 million, right? We split it. We do it fairly. Fairly, I asked. Yeah, he said, his energy returning, sensing a new negotiation. Fair. We split it. 50% for me and your mother, for raising you, 30% for Lena, for her future, and 20% for you. Morgan, that's $4 million. $4 million, just for you, and all you have to do is sign. Think of it. We all win. The family is back together. 50, 30, 20. Even as the new owner of a $20 million estate, I was still only worth 20%. I laughed. It wasn't the sad, bitter laugh I'd had on the cliff. It was a real, full, amazed laugh. It was the laugh of a woman who had finally truly seen the monster and realized it was just a pathetic, greedy little man. No, Dad. What? No, not 1 cent. I smiled, but it was a smile with steel in it. Not 1 cent of Elliot Caro's money will ever go to bailing out your shoddy construction company. Not 1 cent will pay for your gambling debts, and not 1 cent, I said, looking at Lena, will be spent on aesthetic home decor or propping up a fake influencer lifestyle. This money, this house, it's for good work. You wouldn't know what to do with it. That was it. The final no. Greg's face, the salesman's mask, the pleading father, the angry patriarch, it all melted away. What was left was just ugly. He lunged. He grabbed the bars again and screamed, a high, strangled, furious sound. He pointed his finger, the one that had lost its power, right at my face through the bars. You ungrateful. He never finished. I didn't flinch. I just looked past him, at the 2 calm security men. I gave a single, small nod. One of the men stepped forward. He didn't touch my father. He just loomed. He placed his hand on the gate. Sir, he said, in a voice that was pure, bored authority. This is private property. I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the gate. Greg looked at the man's hand, which was the size of a small ham. He looked at his calm, unimpressed eyes. He deflated. The rage, the power, all of it, just hissed out of him. He was just a loud, failed old man, on the wrong side of a gate. I looked at him. I looked at my mother, who was crying, but they were the tears of a thwarted child. I looked at Lena, who was just staring, her face a blank mask of hatred. And I said the words, the ones I had been waiting my whole life to say. That night, Dad, you told me to get out of your house. Today, I'm telling you to get out of mine. I looked at Oliver. And this time, the law is a witness. I turned, my back to them. Sir, I said to the security guard, please close the gate. I walked back up the drive toward my house. I didn't look back. I just listened to the heavy, final, satisfying click-thud of the steel gate locking into place. And over it all, the only sound I really heard was the ocean. My ocean, crashing on the cliffs below. The backlash was, as Oliver had predicted, swift and clumsy. A week after the confrontation at the gate, Greg Clark filed a lawsuit. He didn't just sue me, he sued the estate of Elliot Caro. He sued Oliver's law firm, and he sued Northbridge Electric, claiming a vast, multi-party conspiracy to defraud him of his rightful family inheritance via undue influence and elder manipulation. It was a weak, desperate scattershot of a lawsuit, filed by the cheapest lawyer in Westport Cove who was willing to take a case based on a bar napkin agreement. The case was thrown out in its first hearing. Elliot Caro's will, as Oliver explained to the judge, was a fortress of legal precision. It contained gigabytes of data, including months of site reports, video observations, independent audits of my work, and a full psychiatric evaluation of Elliot himself, taken a week before the addendum was signed, confirming he was of profoundly sound mind and singular purpose. The judge, after reading the summary of Addendum C and viewing the certified copy of Lena's Instagram video, dismissed the case with prejudice, meaning Greg could never file it again. He reportedly warned Greg's lawyer that he was bordering on a frivolous lawsuit and was lucky not to be sanctioned. The news of the lawsuit's spectacular, immediate failure was reported, with a kind of dry local humor, in the Westport Cove Gazette. It told the whole story: the disowned daughter, the secret billionaire, the conditional will, and the failed lawsuit. For Greg Clark, this was a death sentence, not a real one, but a professional one. In a town like Westport Cove, reputation is the only currency that matters. He wasn't just the guy who built a shoddy roof. He was now, officially, the guy who had tried to sue his own daughter after she was proven to be the only honest builder in the family. The calls to Clark Sun Construction stopped. His crew, the one or two guys he had left, quit, the bank, seeing the lawsuit fail, had no more patience. The foreclosure, which had been pending, was finalized. The house, the one I had spent a decade trying to save, was seized. I didn't feel a spike of joy. I didn't celebrate. When Oliver called to tell me the case was dismissed, I just let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since I was 9 years old. It was the last, heaviest piece of concrete I had been carrying for him, and it was finally gone. I just felt light. At Ocean Fall House, the workshop was loud. That was the first thing I noticed. It was filled with the sounds of good work, the click of a wire stripper, the low hum of the soldering fans, the sound of Mason and Sarah arguing over a schematic, and underneath it all, laughter. I had 10 students now, ranging in age from 18 to 25, the garage kids, as they'd started calling themselves, from my old underfunded community center class. They were all here, in a 5,000-square-foot workshop that was cleaner and better equipped than most engineering labs. I was leaning over Mason's shoulder, watching him read a complex diagnostic schematic for the house's solar array. "You're misreading the inverter path. Mace," I said, tapping the screen. "You're assuming the current flows from the battery, but in this mode, the battery is in bypass. The current is coming straight from the roof. So, where does your fault lie?" Mason groaned, stared at the screen, and then his eyes widened. Oh my God. The fault isn't in the hardware. The fault is in the assumption I'm an idiot. "No," I said, smiling. "You're not an idiot. You're an electrician. You just found the flaw. Now, how do you fix it?" He started typing, a huge grin on his face. "Hey, Morgan," Sarah called from across the room, where she was programming a small logic controller. "You got a minute? I think I can get this traffic light simulator to run a new sequence." As I walked over, Mason called out, "Man, this is so cool. I wish my family would come see this. They still don't get it." He looked at me, his expression suddenly earnest. "Is it weird? Like, do you have family, Morgan? Or is it just you?" I stopped. I looked at Mason, who was focused and brilliant. I looked at Sarah, who was fiercely intelligent and just needed a chance. I looked at the 10 other kids, all in work goggles, all learning, all here, in my house. I pointed my chin at the room, at all of them. "Yeah, I've got family," I said. "They're everywhere. Now, let's see that traffic light." Oliver stopped by that afternoon. He'd traded his full suit for a crisp button-down, no tie. He was carrying the final stack of papers from the foundation. "Well, it's all official," he said, placing the box on the massive kitchen island. "The Oceanfall Trade Initiative is a fully recognized, tax-exempt educational foundation. The IRS sends its regards, and you, Ms. Clark, are officially its executive director." "Executive director," I laughed. "I'm still just the electrician." "You are, officially," Oliver said, a small smile playing on his lips. "The only person I have ever met, in my entire legal career, for whom being verbally and publicly disowned by her entire family was the single greatest real estate move of her life." I laughed. A real, full laugh. "I'll take it. Thank you, Oliver, for all of this. It's been a privilege." "Morgan," he said. We just stood there for a moment. The quiet between us comfortable. Easy. It wasn't romance. It was something, in my opinion, far more valuable. It was respect. He wasn't a man trying to save me, and I wasn't a woman who needed saving. We were just two professionals, admiring a piece of good work. The new power wasn't about revenge. I learned that a few weeks later. It was a stormy night, a real Westport Cove gale, with wind and rain lashing against the 3-story glass. The house, of course, didn't even creak. It was built for this. The security alert on my phone was soft. A motion alert from the front gate. I pulled up the camera feed. A man was there, huddled against the steel bars, soaked to the bone, in the driving rain. It was Greg. He wasn't in his truck. He must have walked from the main road. He was drunk, clearly, swaying on his feet. He wasn't yelling. He was just standing there, in the rain, staring at the house. My house. The on-duty security guard. I now had a small, rotating, full-time staff, paid for by the trust patched into my phone. "Ma'am," the guard's voice was calm, professional. "We have a repeat visitor at the main gate. He is not being aggressive, but he is present, and he appears intoxicated. How would you like us to proceed?" I looked at the image on the screen, the man who had thrown me out, the man who had tried to ruin my life, my career, the man who had failed. He just looked small, a pathetic, wet old man in the dark. My hand was on the intercom button. I could have pressed it. I could have gone down there, stood on my side of the gate, dry and warm, and asked him what he wanted. I could have reminded him of what he'd lost, but I didn't. "He's not a threat, John," I said, my voice quiet. "He's just lost. Can you please take a car down? Don't open the gate. Just talk to him through the speaker. Tell him the property is closed, and then call him a taxi. A real one, not an Uber. Bill it to the house account. Just get him home, wherever home is now. And ma'am, if he asks if you were aware..." I looked at the screen, at my father wiping his wet face on his sleeve. "No," I said. "Don't let him know I saw. Just get him out of the rain." I hung up. I turned off the monitor. I did not need to see him go. That was the new power. It wasn't about pushing back. It was about not letting the chaos in, not even for a conversation. It was about being able to protect my boundaries, and his, with a single, quiet, anonymous act of finality. The next summer, I was standing on the main balcony, the same one. The Oceanfall Trade Initiative was in full swing. Below me, on the newly installed solar garden, a project my students had designed and installed themselves. A new class was laughing, pulling cable, checking the voltage. Mason was now my paid supervisor, leading the new kids. I was holding Elliot's letter. I had read it a dozen times, but this felt like the last. I read his words. "Make it a monument to good work." I looked down at the kids, learning, working, safe. I looked at the house, a beacon of good work, standing strong against the wind. I folded the letter. I went back inside, to the simple study I called my own, and I placed the letter in the safe. I didn't need to read it again. His wish was fulfilled. This house wasn't a symbol of greed. It was a place of skill, of opportunity, and of freedom. My phone buzzed. A message from the Garage Kids group chat. It was from Sarah. Hey, boss. When are we having the next sleepover at the legendary electrician's beach house? The new kids don't believe the game room is real. I smiled. I typed back. This Friday. Bring your swimsuits and your multimeters. We're testing the new pool heater wiring. I put the phone in my pocket and walked back to the balcony. I looked out at the ocean, that vast, powerful, clean expanse, and then I turned and looked back into the house. It wasn't empty. It was just waiting. It was full of potential, and I realized, for the first time, I wasn't trying to fill it with people who didn't respect me. I was filling it with people who, like me, were just trying to build something that would last. My father had screamed, "Get out," as a curse. It turned out to be a key. They threw me out of a leaking house, so life could push me into one that could withstand a hurricane. And this time, I was the one deciding who got to walk through the door. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment below and let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to connect with you and hear your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story be heard by more people.